Oscar stood in front of the mirror, trying on a very elegant suit for the wedding. As he looked at himself, he couldn't help but smile. He was really happy with what he saw. Today was a very special day for him. However, he couldn't stop thinking about his mother, Dolores. She worked as a cleaner, and those thoughts kept eating away at his mind. If it weren't for that, everything would have been perfect. Looking at her out of the corner of his eye, Oscar thought, "My God, how does she even put on that clothes? Does she really have nothing better to wear? Even though I bought her a decent outfit for my wedding, knowing that guests would be coming, and how my mother's clothes would look among them." "You look so handsome," said his mother. "I hope we understand each other and you don't come to the wedding," Oscar interrupted. "I'm embarrassed to go with you. You look like a homeless person. Believe me, I don't want you to embarrass me in front of my girlfriend's parents with that outfit." Dolores just pressed her lips together, holding back her anger without responding to her son's words. In her eyes reflected sadness and pain, but she decided not to say anything. She knew it wasn't the right time to argue, especially on the eve of such an important day. She preferred to keep her dignity intact and avoid an argument with Oscar. Instead of confronting him, she quietly walked away, trying to hide her emotions, leaving her son to enjoy the happiness of these moments before the wedding. "I've spent so much energy and time looking for the perfect suit for him, and he still doesn't appreciate everything I've done," Dolores murmured to herself. "What am I doing wrong? I've always tried to be the best mother, always doing everything he asked for, fulfilling all his whims and desires. But why now does he not want me close on such an important day for him?" She felt her heart fill with pain, and the injustice tightened in her chest. Dolores clearly heard Oscar moving down the hallway, heard him lock the door, and then the loud sound of the door slamming, as if her son had pushed her completely out of his life. "Damn stubborn woman!" Oscar exclaimed, hitting the door in frustration. "I hope she has enough common sense not to cause any trouble," she thought. Dolores stayed still, listening as he left the house, feeling a slight discomfort in her chest. Oscar paused for a moment at the door, as if he was about to say something else, maybe another warning to his mother before leaving. But then, in the end, he thought, no, she wouldn't dare disobey. With that thought, he began walking down the stairs. After her son left, Dolores was left alone in the house, unable to stop herself from crying. Her mind was filled with memories of the past, of the times she had worked so hard to raise her son. She remembered all the times she gave him her best, all the sacrifices she made to give him the best she could. But now, she felt bitterness and resentment as she thought about how everything she had done for him seemed to have gone unappreciated. She felt invisible, as though her efforts had never been enough for him. Despite everything she had done, now she felt completely alone and misunderstood, even though she had always been there for him. Despite the unpleasant situation, Dolores's heart felt a strange mix of pride for her son and bitterness at not understanding his decisions. Few people knew that she had spent her early years in an orphanage. To everyone, she was just a charming woman, about 45 years old, raising her son alone. No one stopped to think about everything she had faced in her life, how many trials she had to overcome to get to where she was. The memories took her back to those cold, grey walls of the orphanage where Dolores spent much of her childhood. It was as if she was there once again, seeing a small, lost and lonely girl without the love and care of parents. All she knew were the cruel games and taunts from the other orphaned children. They laughed at her old, worn clothes, humiliating her relentlessly, and that made her feel more vulnerable with each passing day. "My children will never be broken like I was. They will have the best of everything," little Dolores thought in those days, swallowing her bitter tears and enduring the insults. One day, in the tense silence of the dining hall, a group of orphaned children approached her, ready to start a new round of mockery. Valentine, a tall, thin boy with a cold stare, was the first to speak. He walked up to Dolores and said sarcastically, "Look at this one. That's our little Princess Dolores. And those big eyes, too bad they don't see anything." He came even closer and pushed her hard. Just as she was trying to stand, one of the children behind her tripped her, and Dolores fell to the floor, hitting hard against the cold tiles. "Oh, why are you bothering me again?" said Dolores to them as she rubbed her bruised back. Here, among the resentful little souls, he felt as vulnerable as a little mouse among a horde of hungry predators. His heart clenched with pain and fear, and the most outrageous thing was that he didn't even understand where he had failed his fellow orphans in distress. Why are they so cruel? What have I done to them? The other orphans simply laughed, backing Valentine up with their malicious laughter. Their taunts wounded her like knives piercing her tender heart. She tried to cover herself from their taunts by covering her face with her hands, but this only amused the aggressors more. "Perhaps she is just silly," commented one of the orphans. "Hey, clumsy, can't you stand up?" Dolores tried to get up, but they pushed her again, preventing her from standing up. "No, she's not stupid, just clumsy," added Valentine. "Look how she has soiled herself." He grabbed a plate with the leftover food and dumped it on Dolores's head. "Do you like it, princess?" Dolores just clenched her fists, trying to hold back tears. She had long since grown accustomed to these humiliations, but they were getting worse and worse. Dolores felt completely alone, helpless, unable to defend herself against the cruelty of the children around her. She barely managed to stop herself from crying in front of them. At that moment, Lolita, who was sitting next to her, decided to join the game. "Oh, is this a new hairstyle you have?" she asked teasingly. "It's great, great, you just need to fix the length." Lolita got up from the table, picking up a table knife as if she was going to cut bread. "Please don't," Dolores whispered, feeling the sticky mush begin to drip down her neck. "What do you mean, don't do it?" Lolita replied, almost affectionately. "Your tresses bother me so much." With one hand, Lolita held her hair tightly by the hair, while with the other, she began to cut it with the knife, completely unevenly. The messy locks, stained with mush, fell to the floor, while Lolita kept cutting, laughing viciously. "And I hate your dress too." After finishing with the hair, Lolita began cutting Dolores's dress with the knife, punching holes in the fabric. The threads rustled as she tore apart every piece of Dolores's clothing. The knife blade would occasionally hit Dolores's skin, leaving her with some painful scratches. When she finally left her clothes completely shredded, Lolita calmed down, pushed her away casually, and returned to her table. Dolores stood in front of them, clenching her fists tightly and trying to swallow the lump that had formed in her throat. She was silent, but in her eyes shone pain and determination. She found it hard to accept that, in a way, she was different from the other orphans at the orphanage, who seemed to know how to defend themselves and were not as weak as she was. After leaving the orphanage, Dolores had made a firm decision to start a new life, find a job, and make a future for herself. But the stigma of being an orphan continued to haunt her, poisoning her existence. Another memory emerged from the depths of her mind. Dolores was standing in front of the owner of the coffee shop, where she was trying to get a job. She looked at the man anxiously. There was hope in her eyes. But Luis, a serious-looking businessman, looked at her with distrust, frowned, and began to study her carefully. "So, are you from an orphanage, Dolores?" he asked, skeptical. "And why should I hire you? You almost look like a convict." "I promise there won't be any problems with me." "I promise there will be no problems with me," Dolores answered in a low voice. "Give me a chance, please." "Do you have experience? Have you worked in a restaurant before? Why are you blinking so much?" Luis grunted, irritated. "I understand you're afraid, but don't worry, I won't cause trouble. I want to show you that I'm capable." "Oh, sure, They always want to prove something, he answered with disdain. Orphans are always looking for excuses. This is not a kindergarten. We hire experienced people here who don't need to prove their reliability. A fool like you will hardly be able to handle it. I simply have nowhere else to go. I don't have a job, said Dolores, lowering her eyes, resigned. In the end, she recognized her defeat. Luis remained silent, looking at Dolores, thinking what he could gain by giving her a chance. For a moment, a doubt passed through his eyes. Finally, he spoke. All right, Dolores, what a silly name. I'll give you a chance. But be prepared for hard work and a much lower salary than usual. This is a probationary period, and I'll be watching you the whole time. If you don't do well, I won't tolerate mistakes. Thank you. I promise I won't let you down, Dolores replied, hoping that things would finally change. That was the only light Dolores saw in her path. She tried her best, working tirelessly, but the other waiters did not receive her well. They constantly made her life difficult, playing tricks on her at every opportunity. Once, while she was at the bar, preparing orders, Maria and Camilla approached her with a disdainful attitude. They made no attempt to hide the contempt on their faces. Look at this one, the rookie, Camilla shouted sarcastically. She's only been working a short time, and she already thinks she's a big deal, she added, laughing. Hey, orphan, I hear you're upset about how we split the tips, said Maria mockingly. I just asked why everyone gets the same, and I don't even get back what I earned myself. Dolores replied quietly, feeling indignation rise in her throat. The experienced waitresses didn't want to treat her as an equal and always made fun of her past as an orphan. It was completely unfair. The taunts wounded her deeply, as if piercing her soul. But once again, Dolores could do nothing about it. I'm just trying to do my job right, she began, trying to remain calm. Oh, look, she's just trying, Camilla scoffed. Maybe you should go back to your orphanage and play with your cute toys there, instead of getting in our way. Yeah, because if not, you're going to ruin the whole atmosphere here with your pettiness, added Maria with a smirk. Dolores tried to swallow the lump she felt in her throat, and although the humiliation was choking her, she decided not to lower herself to their level. It's not my fault I was left without parents when I was little. That doesn't make me a bad person, Dolores sobbed, unable to contain herself. I'm staying here, whether they like it or not. I have no other options. Maria and Camilla exchanged a look full of contempt, but then Maria leaned closer to Dolores and whispered with a mischievous smile, We'll see how long you hold out. We have our own methods of getting rid of unwanted people, thought Dolores, feeling more rejected than ever. At that moment, she felt like she was back in the orphanage, small, weak, and trembling at the slightest noise. She just wanted to hide in some dark corner, away from Maria and Camilla, hoping they would forget about her, if only for a day. The days, weeks, and months continued to pass in the same way. Once, in the middle of a particularly hectic day at work, Dolores made a mistake and accidentally spilled a drink on the shirt of one of the customers. She looked at the man, who was sitting quietly at a table, with a feeling of dread in her chest. He immediately realized that he had to apologize. My God, please excuse me, I didn't mean to, said Dolores, visibly worried, as she took a napkin out of her pocket to try to clean up the mess. Don't worry, replied the man, smiling without a trace of irritation. It's just a little accident. The shirt will dry quickly, I won't be offended. Dolores was very surprised to see the man's calm reaction, and a little relief invaded her body. Thank you for understanding. I really didn't mean to, she said, feeling the weight of guilt ease a little. Let me offer you compensation for the inconvenience and for the shirt that was ruined, the least I can do. The man waved his hand and said with a kind smile, Really, it's not necessary. I know these things happen sometimes. I can see you're putting in a lot of effort to please the customers. You work hard. I just ask that you be more careful next time." Dolores felt a deep gratitude towards him for his kindness and for not getting angry. "Thank you, really. Thank you so much," she responded, feeling thankful. Then the man, still smiling, added, "How about you keep me company as a small apology? It seems like you could use a break." Dolores quickly glanced at the boss, who was passing nearby, and saw that he simply nodded, allowing her to take a lunch break. "Sit down, I'll treat you," said the man politely. "No, it's not necessary," Dolores replied, but he insisted. "I insist. Sit down. It's no trouble for me." Dolores timidly sat down at the table, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. Thomas, that was his name, instantly sparked a feeling of sympathy in Dolores. He was a pleasant, well-mannered man, always well-dressed, and not like other guests who could sometimes be bothersome or dismissive. With him, she felt at ease, as if she were talking to someone she could trust. A true gentleman. "Thank you," said Dolores, somewhat embarrassed by Thomas's kindness. The conversation continued, and they quickly discovered they had several things in common. Thomas, with a smile, invited Dolores for a coffee after her shift, and she accepted, feeling a slight flutter in her stomach. What a surprise. She felt happy, but at the same time, a bit nervous. Finally, she thought to herself, sighing with impatience. The workday seemed endless, as if the hours were stretching longer than usual. But finally, the day ended, and Dolores left the cafe. The twilight was already beginning to cover the city, and she felt an excitement she couldn't control about the upcoming meeting. She had really liked Thomas, and she was starting to imagine what the future might hold for them. "I hope he hasn't already left," she thought, walking quickly down the sidewalk. "What if I rush too much? What if he doesn't like me at all?" The uncertainty began to fill her like a sticky spiderweb, but just as she stopped for a moment to think, Thomas appeared, stepping into her path. Seeing him, Dolores felt her heart beat faster, and a blush spread across her cheeks. "Hello, Dolores," he greeted her with a smile. "I was waiting for you. Our conversation today was special to me, and I would really like to keep getting to know you." Dolores smiled shyly, a little embarrassed. "Thank you, you're very kind," she replied. "I also really enjoyed spending time with you." Thomas couldn't hide his admiration. "You're very sweet. Your smile makes my heart race. And under these stars, at this moment, you look simply lovely." "Thank you, Thomas. You make me nervous, but I have to admit your words are very nice." "I'm so glad I met you," said Dolores, a bit clumsily. At that moment, Thomas took a bouquet of roses from his hand and carefully offered them to her. When Dolores saw the flowers, she felt even happier. No one had ever given her a bouquet of roses before, and that gesture of affection touched her deeply. They walked slowly down the sidewalk, enjoying the peacefulness of the night. "You shouldn't have spent money on flowers," Dolores said softly. "They're probably expensive." "Don't worry about it, everything is fine," Thomas replied, smiling calmly. "My family is quite wealthy, and I'm used to giving gifts to people I appreciate. I hope these roses at least show you how much I like you." Dolores smiled, feeling grateful, but Thomas, noticing a brief silence, added, "By the way, since I'm talking about my family, why don't you tell me about yours?" Dolores sighed, a bit sad. She wasn't sure if she wanted to talk about her past as an orphan with someone she barely knew. But with the same gentleness as always, she said, "I'd rather not talk about it, Thomas. It's a bit of a painful subject for me." The silence between them was brief, but filled with a silent understanding. Thomas didn't press the matter, respecting her privacy, and they continued walking under the stars, enjoying each other's company in that special moment. She stayed silent for a moment, and then, not wanting to talk more about her family, changed the subject. "Thank you, Thomas. The flowers are beautiful, really. And you're very thoughtful." Better yet, tell me, what do you like to do in your free time? Thomas smiled and began to tell her a little about himself. The conversation continued, and they both dove into an enjoyable chat, forgetting about the everyday problems. Dolores couldn't believe how lucky she was to be talking to such a wonderful person. She felt happy to have met him, and she hoped this conversation would be just the beginning of something more. Thomas told her about his dreams and plans for the future. "I'm in my final year of university, studying economics," he said with a smile of pride. "I want to grow in this field and, of course, secure my family's future." Inspired by his words, Dolores also felt encouraged to share her own dreams. She told him how much she longed to have a big family, how she had always dreamed of a future full of love and close-knit people. They spent a wonderful evening enjoying each other's company. They talked, laughed, and felt so comfortable that time seemed to fly by. Thomas walked her home, and when it was time to say goodbye, they found themselves under the streetlights. "Thank you for such a wonderful night," Dolores whispered, looking at Thomas. "You made it special." Thomas smiled, and with a look full of affection, took her hand. "I'm grateful that you've come into my life, Dolores, and I hope our dreams come true." Dolores felt her heart beat faster as she heard his words. "I hope so too, Thomas," she replied, looking him in the eyes. "You're a special person." They both smiled, standing under the streetlight, surrounded by the soft glow of the moon. No more words were needed. In that magical moment, they both knew that something special had blossomed between them. Gently, Thomas leaned in towards Dolores and kissed her on the lips. It was a tender kiss, full of passion. Dolores responded, feeling that this kiss marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. "I'll see you soon," Thomas whispered, holding her softly. "See you soon," Dolores replied, smiling happily. They parted, but in their hearts, the fire of a new love already burned. They knew that what was to come could only be better. Since Thomas and Dolores started seeing each other almost every day, they immersed themselves completely in love and happiness. Each meeting was filled with tenderness and joy. Dolores couldn't stop wondering if all of this was real, if she had truly found something so beautiful in her life. Every touch of Thomas, every word from him, brought her indescribable happiness. She felt as if she had found her other half. One day, while walking through the park, hand in hand, Thomas suddenly stopped. He looked Dolores in the eyes and, with a voice full of emotion, began to speak. "Dolores, I want to tell you something very important," he said, his voice heavy with anxiety. "I love you so much. You've become the most important person to me, and I can't imagine my life without you. I want to be with you always, love you, and take care of you." Dolores's heart raced. She felt so moved and grateful for his words. "Thomas, I love you more than anything in the world," she whispered, holding him with all her being. They looked into each other's eyes, feeling an infinite love for each other. In that embrace, they felt completely happy, surrounded by the love that seemed to grow more and more with each passing day. From that moment on, their relationship only grew stronger. They spent a lot of time together, supporting each other, sharing both their joys and sorrows. Every day they spent together was a new adventure, full of love and tenderness. However, as often happens in happy stories, that fragile happiness couldn't last forever. Shortly after Thomas's romantic declaration, Dolores discovered that his parents were not at all happy about the relationship that had formed between the humble girl and their beloved son. "Hello," Dolores answered, somewhat surprised by the call from an unknown number. "Dolores, this is Elvira, Thomas's mother. We need to talk seriously. I know you're dating my son, but I want you to understand something. You're not right for him. There are plenty of girls like you. You're just a poor orphan, and we cannot allow our son to be with someone like you." Dolores felt the temperature in her body rise. She didn't quite understand what was happening. but she tried to stay calm. "Hello, Elvira," she answered, taking a deep breath. "I understand your concern, but I have no interest in your money. My love for Thomas is sincere. I am willing to support him in everything, no matter what the circumstances. Maybe we could get to know each other better. Then you would see me for who I am." Elvira, from the tone of her voice, seemed unwilling to listen to anything Dolores had to say. "Don't try to bring me down, girl," she replied sharply. "You can talk about love all you want, but really, all you want is to get closer to our wealth." Dolores couldn't help but feel a knot in her stomach, but she tried to stand firm. "Our son deserves better. A poor girl like you, who can't offer him anything in return, is not suitable for my son." Elvira's voice became even colder and more direct. Dolores remained silent for a moment, trying to assimilate those cruel words. "I understand your doubts," she replied calmly, "but I don't need your money. I love Thomas for who he is, for his kindness, for the way he takes care of me. We are happy together, and I will never let money stand in the way of what I feel." Dolores felt her heart racing, but she had no intention of giving up. Despite her efforts, Elvira's attitude was unwavering. "I don't want you to get your hopes up," Elvira said curtly. "My son is above all that. You are not the right person for him." The call ended abruptly, leaving Dolores with a weight on her chest. Elvira's words hit her like a bucket of cold water. She had tried to explain her love, her sincerity, but all she had received in return was scorn and rejection. The wound in her heart would not close easily, for she felt misunderstood, as if she would never have the chance to show who she really was. However, she couldn't let that bring her down. She knew Thomas loved her, and that was all that mattered to her. Even though the rejection from his mother hurt her deeply, Dolores decided she would move on, because what she had with Thomas was real, and she wouldn't let anything or anyone get in the way of her happiness. She didn't even get a chance to explain who she really was. She was immediately labeled as someone who only sought to take advantage of other people's wealth. That hurt, of course, but Dolores tried not to make a big deal out of it. She told herself she would get over it. What really mattered was that Thomas loved her, and she loved him. Together, they would make it, she thought firmly. But Thomas's parents didn't stop there. After Elvira's call, soon Victor, Thomas's father, appeared at the cafe where Dolores worked. His presence was imposing, and when he approached, Dolores knew he didn't come with good intentions. She didn't want to give in to anything, but the pressure was mounting. "So, girl, let's talk about our business," he began, taking Dolores by the arm and dragging her from the cafeteria lounge to a corner. "I hear you're still seeing my son, despite our clear disapproval. I want to warn you that if you don't stop, you will be in very serious trouble. Victor, I understand that you don't approve of our relationship, but I am an honest and decent girl. I have never been and never will be a beggar. I work, I aspire to be independent," said Dolores, freeing herself from the man's grip. "Don't mix your illusions with reality. You are nobody, a beggar trying to get close to our money." Offended and bewildered, Dolores tried to protect her feelings, but Thomas's father continued to insult her with his words. She understood that she had to fight for her love, to prove that she was worthy of being with Thomas, regardless of her status and financial situation. But no one was going to play fair with her. Thomas's father realized that the negotiations with Dolores had reached a dead end and decided to act radically. Soon after, he returned to the cafe, but this time he went straight to the owner's office. "Listen, Luis, I have a very interesting offer for you. I'm willing to pay if you help me get rid of a girl. Her name is Dolores. She works for you at the cafe. I need you to fire her and make her disappear from my son's life forever," said Victor in a businesslike tone. "What exactly do you need?" Luis asked, not understanding. He didn't want to get involved in other people's conflict, but he knew that defending Dolores would simply doom his small business to certain failure. Fighting with people like Victor was not only stupid, but also dangerous, as the conversation they were having at that moment confirmed. I want you to invent, for example, lack of money in the till or something like that. Find a way to accuse her of theft and fire her for it. I'm willing to reward you handsomely for your help, Victor said. You know, this could be quite dangerous as well as illegal, Victor. I'm not sure. Luis tried one last time. Don't worry about the legality. I'll make sure it all looks like an accident. Just think about what you'll get in return. It will be beneficial for both of us. Think about your safety. After all, you don't want to get in trouble for this girl, do you? All right, I'll think about it. But I don't want any trouble, and I don't want to draw attention to my business. Dolores had no idea of the threat that loomed over her, but deep down, she knew she couldn't compete against Thomas's parents. After Victor's conversation with Luis, things began to take a very dark turn. Shortly thereafter, the police made their appearance at the cafe. "Dolores?" asked one of the officers as he entered the dining room. "Yes, it's me," Dolores replied, trembling. "Is something wrong? You are being accused of stealing funds from this cafe. We have enough evidence to open a case against you," the officer said with an impassive expression. "What? I would never do something like that. I'm an honest and decent person," Dolores protested, completely outraged. "The owner of this establishment has reported a shortage of money and pointed you out as the main suspect. Additionally, we have testimonies and video recordings to support his claims," the officer said firmly, pointing to Luis, the cafe owner. Dolores looked at Luis, hoping he would intervene to clear up the situation, but he simply avoided her gaze, visibly embarrassed. The feeling of betrayal was like a dagger to Dolores's heart. It was a brutal blow. How could anyone do this to her after everything that had happened in this place? She felt utterly shattered. That sense of injustice overwhelmed her like a heavy stone had fallen on top of her. Confusion and rage flooded her. She couldn't believe what was happening to her. "This isn't fair. I'm not guilty. I didn't do anything wrong, and you know it," Dolores cried out, her voice breaking with emotion. "We're just doing our job," the officer replied distantly, as though those words were an empty formality. "The court will determine whether you're guilty or not. You can hire a lawyer to defend yourself." Without another word, the officers grabbed her by the arm and led her out, not allowing her any chance to defend herself further. The feeling of helplessness settled in her chest as the cafe doors closed behind her. They handcuffed her without hesitation and took her to the police car, not even letting her change out of her work uniform. Dolores couldn't stop asking herself in her mind, what had I done to deserve this? The tears burned in her eyes, rolling down her cheeks uncontrollably. It felt like her heart had shattered into 1,000 pieces, and her dreams, which had once seemed so close, crumbled in an instant. In that moment, Dolores understood the worst. Luis, the one person she thought would support her, had given in to corruption and betrayal. The pain in her chest was indescribable, like a deep emptiness that consumed everything. During the interrogation, the investigator asked coldly, "Dolores, do you claim to be innocent of the theft of money?" Dolores, with her soul shattered, quickly responded, "Yes, I am innocent. I would never do something like that. I need to tell you everything about how Victor threatened me, forced me to stay away from his son. This is a trap. I never asked Luis for money in my life." The investigator, without changing his tone, responded with disdain. "Threats, you say? You should have been more careful and not gotten involved with dangerous people." Dolores didn't know what to say, but she continued. "I was forced to confront him. He threatened me, insulted me constantly. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but—" The officer didn't even let her finish. He simply smiled, showing no empathy, and kept pressuring her. "We all need you to admit what you did. If you do, maybe we can talk about reducing your sentence." Desperation overtook Dolores with force. She was trapped between two options she couldn't grasp. On one hand, her integrity and innocence, and on the other, the terrible prospect of a much harsher sentence if she didn't give in. She didn't know what to do. She felt completely alone, utterly vulnerable, unable to see a way out. She thought to herself, "What should I do? I'm innocent, but if I don't plead guilty, a much worse punishment is waiting for me. How can I bear this? Where is the justice?" she asked herself, as the tears again clouded her vision, staring into the cold eyes of the investigator. The investigation moved forward at a rapid pace, giving her no time or space to breathe. Every moment became more unbearable, and Dolores felt as though her life was crumbling without her being able to stop it. Within a few weeks, Dolores found herself in what felt like the cruelest courtroom in the world. After the evidence was presented and she admitted her guilt, the judge declared that she was guilty of stealing the money from the cash register. The sentence would be 3 years in prison. The judge said it so coldly, so impersonally, that Dolores could hardly believe it. At that moment, inside the courtroom, her heart broke. It was as if everything she had dreamed of, everything she had loved, had crumbled before her. Pain overwhelmed her, as she realized that life isn't always fair, that she had been a victim of a system of corruption and betrayal she couldn't escape. The most painful part of all was that Tomas's parents, without thinking twice or giving her the chance to defend her love, sent him abroad. Dolores couldn't believe what was happening. She couldn't accept that her life was falling apart this way. "This can't be happening," she thought, as the trial came to an end and she was left alone with the pain of betrayal. Although she had been forced to plead guilty to save what was left of her life, deep inside, she knew it wasn't fair, that she had done nothing wrong. But the circumstances had crushed her. Sitting in her cell, Dolores couldn't stop remembering Tomas's words, the man she had loved so much and who was now so far away. She remembered how they had dreamed together of a life in which they would always be there for each other, hoping to build a family. Now, all of that seemed so distant, so unreal. "I miss you so much, Tomas," she whispered to herself as the pain in her chest grew. One day, while she was in the prison infirmary, Dolores realized something that took her by surprise. She was pregnant. A gift that Tomas had left her, the result of their only night of love before everything changed. The news filled her with mixed emotions, both joy and worry. How could she raise a child in that place? What would it be like to be a mother in prison? But despite everything, a flicker of happiness gave her strength. The moment of labor came faster than expected. That night Dolores would never forget, no matter how hard she tried to erase it from her memory. The pain she felt was unbearable. Fear enveloped her. She feared for her life and her baby's life. Each contraction felt like another test, and she thought maybe she wouldn't make it. She clung to the bed, trembling, praying with all her might that everything would be okay. "Please, help me, I'm scared," she murmured, almost too weak to speak. But the response from one of the nurses was the complete opposite of the compassion she so desperately needed. "Stop complaining! We're working for you! Hold on!" the nurse said roughly. The tone of the nurse sent a chill through Dolores, but she said nothing else. She stayed silent, focusing only on her pain and the small life growing inside her. "I'm going to be a mother," she thought, as the suffering continued, but with a new hope inside her. Dolores felt relieved that they would allow her to raise and care for her child. She thought about everything she would do for him, for his happiness, despite being in such a grim place. She wanted to be the best mother possible, no matter what. In the end, everything turned out well. Although her baby had to be sent to a foster home for infants, she understood there wasn't much she could do about it. It pained her deeply, but at least she knew her little one was being well cared for. After a year and a half, she was finally released from prison. Dolores's sentence was reduced due to her good behavior, and also because she was a young mother. Fortunately, she was able to take her son with her. However, her sudden freedom did not bring relief to her life or to Oscar's. For a woman who had been in prison, who was a single mother, finding a job was not easy at all. People judged her, and doors closed before her. But Dolores was not going to give up. Everything will be fine, she thought. Once again she went to a job interview. She was determined to give her best. She smiled, trying to appear confident, but inside she felt a huge anxiety. This was her 6th interview, and the previous 5 had ended in rejection. "I can come in," said Dolores in a calm voice, softly knocking on the door. The woman who greeted her in human resources looked up, stared at her for a moment, and then pursed her lips with disdain. "Is there a problem?" Dolores asked, feeling that something wasn't right. The woman let out a bitter laugh and said, "I've received a letter about your past." She continued, "You see, the thing is, what are you doing here? With those records, we don't have jobs for people like you. We don't need trash like you in our company," she said, letting out a derogatory comment while shaking her head. Dolores tried to defend herself, almost without strength. "I'm not guilty. I've served my sentence and I want to start a new life. I'm ready to work and be useful." But the woman wasn't listening. "I don't care what you say. Why would we need an ex-convict here? We don't need someone like you," the woman said, clearly irritated. "Get out of here," she added, pointing to the door with contempt. Dolores left the office with her head down, her heart full of disillusionment. There was no other option but to accept what was offered to her. A cleaning job for a pittance, but at least it would allow her to earn something to survive. It wasn't what she wanted, but she couldn't give up. Her determination, her willpower, her stubborn character, everything she had learned over those years, kept her standing. And of course, her son, her little one, her reason for being. She was determined to fight for him, to give him a better life, to prove that they could make it despite everything. However, time passed, and her son grew, but that didn't make Dolores's life any easier. On the contrary, the situation seemed to get harder and harder. One day, after a long day of work, Dolores came home, exhausted. She opened the door, hoping to find at least a brief moment of rest. She was so tired, so overwhelmed by everything she had to do to keep going, that all she wanted was a break. But as soon as she entered, she knew she couldn't stop. Her fight had to go on, no matter how difficult it was. Suddenly, Oscar entered her room, waving his hand nervously and starting to yell at her roughly. "Mum, I want a new phone. All my friends already have the latest model, and I'm still stuck with this old one. You have to buy me a new one." Dolores sighed, trying to stay calm as she looked at him. "Oscar, I understand that you want a new phone, but right now we don't have much money. I'm working several jobs just to cover the basics. Please, wait a little longer," she tried to explain. But Oscar wasn't willing to listen. "So what? Why do you work so much if you can't give me what I want? Maybe you're not trying hard enough. Other parents buy new stuff for their kids, and all you do is talk about not having money," he said with disdain. Hearing those words, Dolores's heart tightened. She knew that her son didn't understand how hard her life was. All her efforts, everything she had sacrificed, seemed to mean nothing. It felt as though she was never appreciated by the one person closest to her. "Oscar, I work so much so that we don't go hungry to take care of you. But think about it. Money doesn't grow on trees. I can't buy you everything you ask for," she said with a sob, trying to hold back her tears. But Oscar didn't even consider everything his mother did to provide for them. He always spent the money she worked so hard for on unnecessary things. Once, Dolores saw him come home with a new, bright green backpack. "Oscar, another new backpack? If I'm not mistaken, you bought one just a few weeks ago. Why do you need so many?" she said, clearly noticing what he had spent. "Mom, you just don't get it," he responded arrogantly. "I have my standards, and I want to be fashionable like everyone else. "I don't want to look outdated," he said, not caring about the sacrifices his mother was making. Dolores sighed, trying to be firm. "Oscar, you know I'm always willing to support you, and I work hard to give you what you need, but buying new things every month is just a waste of money." But Oscar didn't listen. He always dismissed her words. And as he grew older, nothing changed. He remained a selfish spender. One day he came home with a new, expensive watch. Dolores couldn't help but comment, "Oscar, did you really need that watch? It's so expensive." And he exploded. "Mom, this isn't just some silly thing. I want to be better than you. I have a girlfriend from a wealthy family, and she deserves to be with a handsome guy. We're going to get married soon, and if you keep looking like you do, I'll be embarrassed to have you at the ceremony," he said, with a harshness that took her breath away. Dolores was left speechless, looking at her son with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. Dolores tried to defend herself, but Oscar immediately interrupted her, not allowing her to speak, and continued his selfish monologue. "Mom, you know we don't have money, but maybe the problem is that you just can't take care of yourself. You haven't tried hard enough to build a good future for us." Dolores tried to speak, but the words got caught in her throat. She realized that, despite all her efforts, all the sacrifices she had made to teach her son the value of what they had, it had all been in vain. Everything she had tried seemed to have no effect. She felt a deep pain in her chest. She wiped away her tears, trying to focus on the present. Her heart was filled with bitterness over the unfairness of that relationship, and her broken dreams left her completely shattered. "How is it possible, son? Am I not even worthy of seeing your wedding?" she murmured with sadness. Oscar didn't even look at her. Dolores stood up, feeling that life had taken so much from her that she could no longer stay there, submissive and defeated. With determination, she left the room. Half an hour later, she found herself in an elegant clothing store, trying on a nightdress. "Oh, how beautiful," said a man passing by. He had no reason to compliment her, he just wanted to be kind. Dolores smiled shyly, grateful for the compliment. She decided to buy the dress, and knowing she would feel good at her son's wedding, she asked the salesman to also wrap up some shoes and a handbag for her. Half an hour later, Dolores was in an expensive beauty salon, where the specialist, upon seeing her face, said, "You look gorgeous, your features are so elegant and your hair shines so much. We're going to make you shine even more." Dolores thanked her with a smile, but her eyes still reflected sadness. Inside, she longed to feel like other women, well-groomed and beautiful, but life had denied her that opportunity. "It's so unfair," she thought, as she looked at her reflection. When the treatment was finished, Dolores felt better, more confident. She now had new clothes, her hair was well styled, and her makeup enhanced her natural beauty. She was finally ready to face the world. When she arrived at the wedding venue, the hostess opened the door for her, and all the guests turned to look at her. They whispered among themselves, curious to know who this well-dressed woman was. Some of them stood on tiptoe to get a better look. "Look, who's that?" someone said. "She's so beautiful," another person responded. "I've never seen her here before." "Is she a relative of the groom?" another voice commented. "I don't know, but she looks incredible," said a woman by the flower stand. At that moment, Oscar saw her from across the room. His face turned red with fury, and he rushed toward her. "What the hell are you doing here, beggar?" "I clearly told you you weren't invited," he shouted, gritting his teeth, furious. Dolores looked at her son with sadness in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. She wasn't going to respond to his hurtful words. She simply walked past him. She went up to the small platform that had been set up for the toasts. She took the microphone, took a deep breath, and prepared to congratulate the newlyweds. "Dear Oscar and Nina, I want to wish you all the best on this very special day," she began, her voice a little choked. "May your love be strong, and may happiness accompany you every day of your life together. I'm so proud of what you've achieved, and I'd love to be part of this joyful moment." As she finished her toast, tears began to well up in her eyes, despite her best efforts to hold them back. Fortunately, not all the guests looked at her with the coldness her own son had shown. There was some applause, and one of the men, who seemed to be an invited guest from the bride's family, approached. He was a man about 45 or 50 years old. He approached her, looked her up and down, and suddenly said, "Excuse me. I can't let the opportunity pass to invite such dazzling beauty to dance. May I have this dance?" Dolores looked at him in surprise. "Are you mistaken? I don't think we know each other," she replied, a bit confused. "No, I'm not mistaken," he said, smiling. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life." Dolores stared at him in astonishment, and suddenly, something clicked inside her. Her eyes lit up. This was Tomás, her love from so many years ago, the one who had been taken from her. A wave of nostalgia and emotion flooded her chest. "Tomás, is it really you?" she said, her voice trembling with emotion. He smiled and took a step closer. Their gazes met, and at that moment, Dolores felt her heart beat faster, filled with joy, with pain for the lost years, but also with hope for a future that could be happy. "I'm so happy to see you," she said, still in disbelief. "I'm happy to finally see you too, Dolores. I never stopped thinking about you all these years," he replied. They continued to look at each other, and in that instant, something ignited inside them, as if the love they had felt all those years ago had never really gone away. "How much time has passed? My God, how I've waited for you," Dolores thought, her heart overflowing with emotion. "May I invite you to dance?" Tomás repeated, smiling. Dolores, with a shy smile, accepted and took his hand. They descended from the platform and began to dance slowly, surrounded by light and music. "How have you been?" Dolores asked, still a little nervous. "Good. I've started my own company. I've accumulated some capital. Now I'm independent, a millionaire," Tomás said, leading her gracefully across the dance floor. As they danced, the guests watched them, fascinated. Everyone seemed hypnotized by the couple moving with such grace. The dance floor began to empty around them while they kept dancing. "They look so good together," one man whispered. "Yes, it's as if they were made for each other," another woman replied. Dolores felt such happiness in her heart that she could hardly believe she was living this moment. "I don't remember the last time I felt so alive," she thought. "I'm happy again with Tomás," she thought, feeling a mixture of tenderness and emotion. "And you haven't changed a bit," Tomás whispered in her ear as they danced. "You're as beautiful as always." At that moment, Oscar, who had been standing to one side of the dance floor, was watching the scene with an embarrassed look. He couldn't help but feel guilty for everything he had said to his mother. Suddenly, something inside him changed. He realized how disdainfully and indifferently he had treated her, and now he saw how much he had been wrong. He couldn't hold himself back any longer and ran toward Dolores, who was happily dancing with Tomás. "Mum, I'm so sorry for my behavior. Please forgive me," Oscar said, tears in his eyes. "I understand now that you deserve so much more." Dolores stopped, stepping a little away from Tomás, while she felt a mix of emotions. Relief, knowing that her son had finally understood his mistakes, but also a great joy at the thought of being able to start a new chapter in her relationship with him. "Oscar, I forgive you," Dolores said with a smile, though her throat tightened. "It's been a long time, but I'm glad to know that you've realized what you did wrong." For the first time in many years, Dolores felt truly free. It was as if, finally, the The wounds of the past were beginning to heal in her soul. "Dolores, I don't want to lose you again," Tomas said, stepping closer to her. "My parents separated us, but that's never going to happen again. You're the most important thing to me, and I want to spend the rest of my days with you, fill you with love and happiness. Let me be your husband." Dolores, with shining eyes and her heart full of emotion, responded, "Tomas, I never imagined I'd find such a love after everything I've been through. I'm so happy, and I accept your proposal. Yes, I want to be your wife." Tomas, Dolores, and Oscar embraced, and the guests began to applaud, moved by the beautiful reconciliation they had just witnessed. Some whispered among themselves, "Looks like another wedding is coming soon."